You didn't fall apart by accident. Your soul knew this was the only way you'd remember who you are. There's a moment most people never talk about, a moment before the breakthrough, before the clarity, before the light. It's the moment when everything collapses and you're left staring at the pieces of a life that no longer fits. You sit in your car, in your room, or in a conversation that no longer makes sense, and you realize something has broken. And maybe, for the first time, something is waking up. This isn't a breakdown. It's a spiritual initiation disguised as pain. It doesn't look beautiful. It doesn't sound wise. It feels like being abandoned by everything you believed would save you. But what if that emptiness, that unbearable silence wasn't failure, but design? What if your soul pulled the emergency brake because you were running too far from yourself? We are trained to see pain as a mistake. But the ancient mystics, the modern neuroscientists, the awakeners who walked through the fire, they say the same thing. Collapse is often the first language of awakening. It's not the end of your story. It's the moment your real story begins. And if you feel like you're losing your mind, you might actually be finding yourself. So today we step into this sacred unraveling. We decode the intelligence hidden in pain. We trace the path from breakdown to breakthrough. And we start by asking a question most people are too afraid to ask. What if your breaking was never a failure, but an agreement? The silent collapse. When the soul pulls the emergency brake. There's a kind of suffering that has no language. It doesn't cry out. It doesn't scream. It lingers. Quiet. Slow. Invisible. It's the kind of pain that seeps into the spaces between your thoughts and hides behind your smile. It doesn't look like trauma. It looks like a life that technically works, a job you don't hate, a relationship that isn't terrible, a routine that keeps your body moving even as your soul starts to die. And then one day, the system shuts down, not suddenly, slowly, like fog moving in, and nothing makes sense anymore. That's how spiritual awakening often begins, not with a bolt of lightning, but with a quiet collapse no one else sees. You wake up one morning and everything feels wrong. The life that once made sense feels hollow. The things you used to chase now feel pointless. You're surrounded by people and yet feel completely alone. Not because they changed, but because something inside you is being dismantled. Something you can't explain. Something you didn't ask for. But here's what nobody told you. This collapse was sacred. It wasn't chaos, it was intelligence. What you're calling falling apart is your soul calling you back. Back to your truth. Back to your center. Back to the version of yourself you buried under productivity, performance, and pleasing everyone but yourself. We think awakening is peaceful. But before the peace, there's fire, there's confusion, there's grief. The grief of realizing that the life you built was designed by a version of you that was trying to survive, not awaken. And that version, the one who built the mask, who held it all together, who stayed silent to be safe, is now dying. And that death feels like madness. This is the point where most people panic. They try to fix it, they go to therapy, they meditate harder, they read more books, they journal about finding themselves. But nothing works, because this isn't a problem to solve. It's an identity to shed. And shedding hurts. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And the pain isn't punishment, it's purification. Not because you're being judged, but because you're being refined. Your old patterns, your outdated beliefs, your inherited programming, they can't come with you where you're going. This is the spiritual intelligence behind collapse. When your ego resists, your soul reroutes. It deconstructs everything that no longer matches your essence. It strips away the lies, the false roles, the inherited dreams that never belonged to you. It breaks the mirror you were using to define yourself, so you can finally see who you are without it. But here's the paradox. No one else sees it. To the outside world, you just look tired, distracted, maybe even dramatic. But inside, you are in the middle of a sacred dismantling. You are in the quiet thunderstorm that destroys nothing except the illusions you thought were you. And that's why it feels so disorienting, because you're not just grieving a relationship or a career, you're grieving a self. The false self that played by the rules, checked the boxes, kept everything under control. But now, control doesn't work anymore. The mask feels too heavy. The pretending is unbearable, and the life you once tolerated now feels like spiritual suffocation. This is the dark night of the soul, not depression, not drama. A spiritual crisis designed to awaken something you didn't know you had, your original self. And that original self isn't polite, it's not perfect, it's not interested in people-pleasing or playing small. It doesn't care about status or certainty. It cares about truth, about wholeness, about your return to presence. And to wake you up, it will use whatever it has to even collapse. So if you're here, in this space, wondering why nothing feels real anymore, you're not broken. You're being broken open. Your mind is losing its grip because your soul is taking the wheel. And yes, that feels terrifying, because we were taught to fear anything we can't explain. But you don't need to explain this. You need to let it happen. Let the collapse come. Let the identity fall. Let the version of you that needed to be everything to everyone finally rest, not because you failed, but because you remembered. You remembered that your worth was never in your doing, that your truth was never in your role, that your awakening would require everything safe in you to crack open, so something real could be born. You didn't choose this consciously, but your soul did. And now it's your job to trust what your mind can't understand. This is not the end of your life. It's the moment you finally stop living someone else's. Initiation by fire. What the pain is really doing to you. There comes a moment in this journey when the collapse stops feeling confusing and starts feeling cruel. When the numbness turns into a burning inside your chest. When grief mixes with anger and the silence inside you becomes loud enough to shake your bones. This is the moment when many believe they are breaking beyond repair, when the world feels hostile and your emotions no longer obey logic. But what feels like destruction is the oldest spiritual technology in existence. It is purification. It is the fire that melts everything false so only truth remains. In neuroscience, this moment is called neural restructuring. Old identity networks begin to dissolve. Old emotional programs lose power. The brain releases patterns built on fear, survival, and self-protection. And like any system losing its foundation, it shakes, it trembles, it panics. You feel it as anxiety, confusion, emotional overwhelm. But this is not malfunction, this is recalibration. Your nervous system is grieving a self that cannot follow you into your next chapter. And grief, as every mystic and every psychologist knows, is a sacred process. You are not just feeling sadness. You are experiencing the death of illusion. The death of the version of you who believed you had to earn love. The death of the version who thought control was safety. The death of the version who tried to be what the world asked instead of what your soul demanded. Every tear you shed is a release of identity. Every panic you feel is ego losing its grip. Every moment you doubt your sanity is the moment your mind loses power and awareness gains space. People think awakening is light and peace, but light only comes after the burning. Peace only comes after the war inside you ends, and the war does not end by fighting harder. It ends when your ego realizes it cannot fight who you are becoming. Scientists call this process neuroplasticity. Mystics call it ego death. Jesus called it being born again. Jung called it individuation. You can call it whatever you want, but the truth remains, you are being rewritten from the inside out. The emotional storms you feel are not signs of weakness. They are evidence that the old self is losing its authority. The mind hates this moment because it cannot control it. The soul loves this moment because it has waited lifetimes for it. And in this tension between who you were and who you are becoming, your inner fire rises. The fire that refuses to let you go back to sleep. The fire that refuses to let you shrink again. The fire that burns away everything that is not aligned with truth. This pain is not punishment. Nothing is wrong with you. You are not failing. You are not unstable. You are not weak. You are being reforged. Gold only becomes gold by enduring fire. Souls only become awakened by surrendering to the same flame. And if you are here right now in this heat, shaking between worlds, unable to recognize yourself, feeling like you're dissolving, know this: you are exactly where transformation happens. not in the moments you feel strong, but in the moments you feel undone. Because true strength is not built through stability. True strength is born through surrender. Every breakdown you feel is your unconscious releasing what cannot stay. Every surge of emotion is energy being freed from your past. Every moment you feel like you're losing control is the moment your deeper intelligence is taking over. You are not being punished, you are being prepared. You are not dying, you are emerging. The future version of you is calling. And the only way to meet them is to let the fire do its work. Let yourself feel, let yourself release. Let yourself be undone. Because the identity that collapses here was never your identity. It was your armor. And armor cannot enter a new life. Only truth can. When the signs intensify, the language of the universe. Once the fire has passed through you, once the layers of false identity have begun to peel away, something strange begins to happen. It's subtle at first. You think of someone and they message you. You open a book and the exact answer to the question you didn't dare say aloud is staring back at you. You glance at the clock and it's always repeating numbers. You hear a song and it speaks the words your soul needed to remember. You tell yourself it's coincidence, random, nothing. But something in you knows, something ancient, something deep. This is the universe beginning to speak your language. The awakening journey is not just about pain. It's about perception. As your mind surrenders and your soul expands, you begin to perceive what was always there, a field of intelligence orchestrating patterns beyond logic. Carl Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, a causal connecting principle where external events mirror your internal state with mathematical precision. You don't control these signs, you don't summon them. You simply become receptive enough to notice them. They're not signs because you're delusional. They're signs because you're attuned. In the early stages, synchronicities feel magical. You tell your friends about them, you keep a journal, you smile in disbelief. But as awakening deepens, these moments shift. They become constant. They become directional. They begin to feel less like magic and more like communication. You stop seeing the universe as a machine of chaos. You begin to feel it as a living, breathing intelligence. And it begins answering you in symbols, in timing, in mirrors you never noticed before. Not to impress you, but to guide you. Not to entertain your ego, but to align you with something greater. This is the moment when many question their sanity, because no one around you sees it. No one else hears the messages hidden in ordinary life. But your reality is no longer ordinary. You are no longer on the frequency of logic alone. You are starting to operate through what many spiritual traditions call second attention, the awareness that flows beneath appearances, and in this space, everything becomes symbolic. Everything becomes meaningful. The billboard isn't just an ad, it's an answer. The bird isn't just flying by, it's a confirmation. The stranger's conversation next to you isn't random, it's medicine. You don't need to look for signs, you are inside them. But here's the truth. Synchronicity is not a party trick. It's not a spiritual toy. It's a test of alignment. The moment you try to manipulate it, to use it to feed your ego or bypass the work, the signal goes quiet. The universe responds to authenticity, not performance. It doesn't play with control. It dances with surrender. When your inner world is coherent, when your thoughts, emotions, and soul are in harmony, the external world reflects that harmony with impossible precision. Jung believed that synchronicities intensify only when consciousness has reached a threshold. It's not about belief, it's about frequency. You don't attract the signs, you become them. You don't force the message, you clear the noise inside you so the message can arrive. This is why so many awakened people feel isolated. How do you explain to someone that reality is having conversations with you? How do you prove that the world is alive and speaking in metaphor, in timing, in pattern? You can't. That's the sacred loneliness of this path. But you can trust it. You can lean in. You can start to live in the flow of alignment rather than the illusion of control. You can begin to understand that life is not random. It is precise. It is speaking to you through everything. And the more you listen without needing to prove, the louder it gets. Not in volume, but in clarity. The signs don't stop when you awaken. they intensify. They become your compass. They stop being rare. They become your way of life. If you're seeing these signs, if reality is responding to your inner state, don't doubt your experience. Don't reduce it to chance. Don't let others convince you that it's just projection. Trust the mirror. Trust the rhythm. Trust the web of connection you're being woven into. You're not being shown these things to be amazed. You're being shown them to remember. You're not separate from the universe. You are part of its intelligence, and you are being guided not to a destination, but to your deeper self. The death of control, ego breakdown, and the rise of the self. There's a moment in the awakening where the signs stop being comforting. They start cutting. They start revealing, not just patterns in the world, but patterns in you. Your attachments, your masks, your addictions to certainty. This is where the process stops feeling like alignment and starts feeling like exposure. You see yourself reacting. You see yourself performing. You hear your own voice and feel the falseness in it, and there's nowhere left to hide. This is the death of control. People imagine ego death as a psychedelic ecstasy, as the feeling of merging into the universe. But in reality, ego death feels like humiliation. It feels like standing in front of the mirror while everything you thought was you begins to dissolve, and you're forced to admit you were never in control to begin with. Jung wrote, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego, and that defeat is necessary, because the ego was never meant to be the master. It was meant to be a servant, a translator, a navigator, not the captain. And when the soul begins to rise, the ego panics, because it knows it's being demoted. This breakdown doesn't happen once. It's not a single moment of release. It's a series of moments, layers peeling back, illusions dying slowly and sometimes painfully. You watch yourself try to regain control. You try to reattach to the old story. You bargain with life. Just let me go back. Let me feel safe. Let me be someone again. But the process is not negotiable. The awakening does not bend to comfort. It bends to truth, and truth has no tolerance for false power. Control is based on fear. The ego thinks if I can manage everything, people's opinions, outcomes, timelines, I will finally feel safe. But awakening reveals the truth. Control is not safety. Control is prison. Real safety is presence. Real power is surrender. And surrender is terrifying to a mind built on plans and backup plans. So what happens? The ego rebels. It fights. It tries to reassert dominance. You may find yourself obsessively analyzing, needing answers, trying to fix the process like a problem. You might even spiritualize the ego, using rituals, affirmations, or manifesting to bypass the collapse. But the soul is not fooled. The self doesn't want control, it wants coherence. This is why the breakdown feels so intimate, because it's not about the world anymore. It's about you, watching yourself fall apart from the inside. It's not about people leaving. It's about watching yourself let them go. It's not about losing the job, it's about losing your identity with it. You begin to realize you were never choosing from truth. You were choosing from fear, from programming, from pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But here's where it gets miraculous. Once the ego loosens its grip, something else rises. Not louder, quieter, not smarter, wiser. The self. The presence within you that never needed to be someone. The stillness that doesn't chase validation. The awareness that doesn't cling to identity. It doesn't need to control because it trusts. It trusts timing. It trusts intelligence. It trusts that who you are is not the sum of your achievements or the opinions of others. It knows, it always knew. It was just waiting for the noise to stop. When this self begins to lead, you start to live differently, not impulsively, not recklessly, but in tune, in deep cellular resonance. You stop performing, you start responding. You stop chasing, you start allowing. You stop needing to understand everything, because the need to understand was your way of trying to stay in charge. But now, you begin to feel something better than understanding. You begin to feel connected. This connection to self, to source, to life, doesn't remove difficulty, but it does remove confusion. It replaces anxiety with clarity. Not always in the mind, but in the body. The body starts to lead. Sensations become guidance. Emotions become messengers. And life begins to shape itself around your presence instead of your performance. This is when the real awakening begins. You are not losing control. You are losing the illusion of control. What's rising in its place is not chaos, but a deeper intelligence that cannot be managed by the mind. It must be trusted. It must be lived. It must be embodied. And to live it, you must let go. Not once, over and over again. Until surrender is no longer a decision, but a way of being. Split-screen living, when two selves awaken. There's a shift in perception that's hard to explain until you live it. One part of you still wakes up and goes through the motions. Coffee, to-do list, conversations, small talk. But something else is now awake within you. A deeper presence that watches everything unfold from a distance that isn't far, yet feels eternal. You find yourself living in two worlds at once. The world of the person and the world of the observer. This is not disassociation, this is awakening. It's what mystics have called witness consciousness. And when it arrives, your life stops being a movie you're trapped inside and becomes a film you're both living and watching at the same time. At first it feels surreal. You're brushing your teeth and suddenly aware of the fact that you're watching yourself brushing your teeth. You're in a conversation saying all the right things, but behind your words there's another awareness, silently noticing how none of this is you anymore. You're not judging, you're simply seeing through roles, through masks, through expectations, through patterns, and it's disorienting. Because the identity you've spent a lifetime constructing is still operating, but you no longer believe in it, not fully. This is what Jung called the relativization of the ego. You don't destroy the self you used to be. You just stop identifying with it as the only self. Your identity expands. It stretches to hold paradoxes that used to feel impossible. You can feel sadness and peace at once. You can feel love and boundaries at once. You can grieve and trust at the same time. You're not flipping between emotions, you're holding them simultaneously because the self, the real you, is vast enough to hold what the ego never could. The world doesn't prepare you for this. It doesn't teach you how to live with one foot in the infinite and the other in the kitchen washing dishes. But that's exactly what this stage is. You don't leave the human behind. You just stop being limited by it. You start to see yourself as both the drop and the ocean, both the character and the writer. And this doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you soft, humbled, grateful, because you realize how much of your life was built on the assumption that you were just the mind, the body, the story. And now you know you're more. But this knowing comes with a cost, because now you see everyone else still trapped in one layer, still convinced their story is the whole truth, still caught in the defense of their ego. And it hurts. You want to shake them, wake them, tell them they are more than what they think. But you also remember how painful this shift was for you. You remember the burning, the confusion, the solitude, so you stop preaching, you start holding not their hands, their contradictions, their chaos, their split, because you know they're not broken, they're becoming, just like you did. And here's the beauty of this phase. It's the beginning of inner leadership, not leading others, leading yourself, leading your reactions, leading your energy. You begin to notice your own triggers in real time, not after, not days later, right in the moment. You see the rise of irritation. You see the defense building. And instead of acting, you pause, not because you're trying to be enlightened, but because you're finally free to choose. This is what sovereignty feels like. You are no longer owned by your wounds. You are no longer ruled by your conditioning. You are no longer hijacked by every emotion that passes through you. You feel them fully, but you are not them. And that space between feeling and reaction, that's your power. That's your freedom. That's your awakening in motion. There's nothing performative about this. It's not about being spiritual. It's not about being calm all the time. It's about being real, honest, aware. You might still lose your temper, still fall into old loops, but now you watch yourself do it. And that witnessing alone is what makes the difference, because in the witnessing, transformation begins. without violence, without judgment, just presence. This is the gift of split-screen living. You are no longer the story. You are the space the story unfolds within. And that space is sacred. The hidden curriculum. What your soul is really teaching you. By the time you arrive here, something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer asking, why is this happening to me? You're starting to ask, what is this trying to show me? The collapse no longer feels random. The pain no longer feels like punishment. The loneliness begins to reveal a strange kind of clarity, a sacred hush where learning happens without textbooks, without teachers, without words, because there's a deeper intelligence at work now. And that intelligence is not external, it's not separate, it's your soul, transmitting lessons from the inside out. Spiritual awakening doesn't come with a syllabus, but make no mistake, it has a curriculum, and that curriculum is tailored, personal, designed precisely for what your evolution needs. No two awakenings are the same, but if you look closely, you'll begin to recognize the themes, the hidden teachings, the initiations your old self would have never chosen, but your deeper self requires. The first lesson is trust. Not the trust you read in spiritual books, not the one you pretend to have when things go well. This is trust stripped of conditions, trust when the answers don't come, trust when the plan disappears, trust when you're standing in the ashes of who you used to be with no map and no sign that you're doing anything right. It's here, in this brutal spaciousness, that your soul whispers, stay. Don't solve, don't flee, just stay. Because staying in uncertainty is what builds your spiritual spine. Then comes the lesson of surrender. Not a passive giving up, but an active letting go. Letting go of the identity you built to earn love. Letting go of timelines that were never yours. Letting go of the war against what is. And what replaces it isn't apathy, it's clarity. You begin to realize that you don't have to control the river, you just have to stop swimming against it. And in that surrender, something opens. You feel life carrying you. Not to where you wanted to go, but to where you actually belong. The next layer reveals itself through paradox. You start to experience things that don't logically fit together, and yet feel entirely true. You feel grief and gratitude in the same breath. You feel lost and guided at once. You feel broken and whole simultaneously. And the mind resists this. It wants answers, clean categories, certainty. But awakening doesn't care about neatness. It cares about depth, so it dismantles binary thinking. It teaches you to sit in contradiction without needing to resolve it. And this is how your consciousness expands, not by choosing sides, but by holding both. And then there's the lesson of embodiment. Awakening isn't just about insight. It's about integration. It's not enough to know you are awareness. You have to live that knowing, in the middle of traffic, in difficult conversations, in moments where your old patterns rise up like ghosts asking to be heard one last time. And when they do, you don't fight them anymore. You feel them. You breathe with them. You honor what they protected in you. And then you gently choose something else. Not because you should, but because you're finally able to. Perhaps the hardest lesson is remembering. Not learning something new, but remembering what your soul always knew. That you are not here to fix yourself. You are here to uncover yourself. To peel back the inherited ideas, the cultural scripts, the ancestral pain, the projections. And underneath all of it, there is just you. Not the small you, the true you. The one that doesn't need permission. The one that remembers God in silence. The one that never left the path, only forgot they were walking it. Every loss, every ache, every unanswered prayer was part of this unfolding. Not to punish you, to shape you, to remind you, to empty the vessel so it could hold something divine. And that something was never a thing at all. It was a presence, a knowing, a wholeness that cannot be taught, only uncovered. So if it all feels like too much, that's because it is. Because awakening will never fit in the life your ego built. It was never meant to. The breakdown isn't failure, it's initiation. The pain isn't proof of weakness. It's the process of unlearning everything that blocked your light. You don't need to rush to understand it all. You just need to keep listening, because your soul is still teaching in every moment, in every emotion, in every breath. And the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. You're not broken. You're becoming fluent in a language you were born to speak. The point of no return, the irreversibility of consciousness. There's a moment in awakening that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff you didn't know you were walking toward. You turn around, expecting to go back, but the ground behind you has disappeared. The road you once traveled has crumbled. The person you used to be no longer fits. The beliefs that carried you no longer hold. And even if you try, you can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee what you've seen. This is the point of no return, not because something terrible has happened, but because something irreversible has awakened in you. Consciousness doesn't give you a choice. Once it expands, it doesn't shrink. Once it reveals, it doesn't retract. This is not punishment. It's protection. You've crossed a threshold where ignorance is no longer safety, where distraction no longer satisfies, where denial no longer works. You now feel everything more deeply. The beauty, the grief, the subtle distortions in conversation, the lies in your own voice, the sacred ache beneath every human interaction. You're not fragile. You're attuned. And that attunement cannot be undone. This is the moment when the ego begins to mourn, because what dies here is the illusion of return, the illusion that you can go back to who you were before the collapse, that you can unknow your own depth, that you can live half awake again, but you can't. And deep down you don't even want to, because as painful as this awakening is, as isolating and disorienting and uncomfortable as it can be, there's something undeniable about it, something profoundly real, something that feels like coming home, even as it sets fire to the house you thought was yours. Joseph Campbell called it crossing the threshold. Jung called it the individuation process. Indigenous traditions call it initiation. It's the same pattern told in different languages. The hero leaves the village, crosses into the unknown, faces death, and emerges as something more than human, not superior, but awake. The key is not surviving the threshold, it's surrendering to it, letting it strip you of everything you thought you needed, letting it reveal what you truly are beneath the roles, the wounds, the identities you inherited. The point of no return is not a punishment. It's a promise. It's the soul's way of making sure you don't get lost in the noise again. It's life's way of saying, you've come too far to turn around now. You've grown too much to shrink again. And even if you feel small, even if you feel unworthy or confused or unsure, the path is already opened beneath your feet. All that's left is to walk it. What changes after this is subtle but undeniable. You stop needing answers. You stop looking for someone to save you. You begin to trust the intelligence in your own breath. You begin to sense when something is aligned before your mind can justify it. You begin to feel the shape of your path by how your nervous system responds to it. Not by what it promises externally, but by how deeply it resonates within. This is not about being perfect, it's about being real, being responsive, being awake. There are days when you'll wish you could go back, when the simplicity of unconsciousness seems appealing, when the pain of seeing too much weighs on your chest. But remember this, there is a deeper peace on this side of the threshold, not the peace of comfort, the peace of coherence, the peace of knowing you are no longer betraying yourself to belong. The peace of knowing that even if you walk this road alone, you are not lost. You are found, not by others, by yourself. And that self, that vast quiet awareness that watches you rise and fall, ache and heal, lose and remember, is no longer a concept. It is your anchor, your compass, your home. You don't return from that. You expand from it. You live from it. And everything else becomes a reflection of it. So if you feel like you've gone too far, like something inside you has changed forever, like the life you used to live no longer fits, you're right. You've crossed over. And now the only way forward is through the new terrain of your being, through the untamed wisdom of your soul, through the beautiful, terrifying, irreversible miracle of consciousness awakening to itself. The gift of your collapse. By now, you've realized this journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you've always been beneath the noise. The collapse you feared, the one that tore through your plans, your image, your sense of control, that it wasn't the end. It was the sacred beginning, the invitation, the moment your soul decided it was time to stop pretending, stop hiding, stop surviving, and start returning. What once looked like failure now feels like formation. What once felt like devastation now reveals itself as divine choreography. You weren't being punished. You were being realigned. Life wasn't taking things away. It was clearing the way, making space, not for more achievements or applause, but for presence, for truth, for a deeper kind of wholeness that can't be measured in outcomes, but only felt in silence. This is the paradox of awakening. It doesn't start when everything feels good. It begins when everything breaks, when you fall to your knees, not because you're weak, but because your soul refuses to keep playing a role that's too small. That fall, that heartbreak, that unraveling, it cracked you open just enough for the light to enter. And once it does, you are no longer the same. You begin to see life not as a series of random events, but as a guided unfolding, one designed to return you to your own depth. You stop needing to prove anything. You stop chasing versions of yourself that were never yours. You stop worshipping validation, certainty, or even clarity. Instead, you begin to value presence, stillness. The quiet intelligence that emerges when you stop performing and start listening. You begin to feel your life from the inside out. You begin to trust your nervous system again. You stop gaslighting your emotions. You stop abandoning yourself for temporary comfort. And this slowly becomes your new way of being. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's steady, subtle, sacred. You begin to walk differently. You say less, but it means more. You attract people not because you're performing, but because your energy is clean. Your alignment speaks louder than your words. Your peace becomes magnetic. Not because you're above the world, but because you're finally rooted in something deeper than it. You're not here to be perfect. You're not here to get everything right. You're here to remember, to become so intimately connected to what is real inside you that everything else falls away. You're here to live from your center, to honor the cycles of your becoming, to walk with grace even when you feel unsure, especially when you feel unsure. This is the moment when you realize the breakdown wasn't the end of your life. It was the end of your disconnection. The collapse wasn't failure, it was freedom. The fire didn't destroy you, it revealed you. What remains now is not the ashes of your former self. What remains is the core, the essence, the self that cannot be broken, only buried, and now uncovered. You didn't lose yourself, you lost everything that was never you. And if you're still grieving, if you're still healing, if you're still aching, that's okay. You don't need to rush. You don't need to be better. You just need to keep breathing with yourself, being with yourself, trusting this unfolding. Because the person emerging on the other side of this collapse is not just awakened, they are alive in a way they've never been before. So when you look back on your life, you won't see this moment as your downfall. You'll see it as your turning point. The sacred detour that brought you home. You had to break first, because that's how awakening begins. If this message reached something true inside you, write in the comments, "My awakening began with my breaking." Let others feel less alone through your story. And if you're still in the fire, still shedding, still remembering, know this: you are not behind. You are not off track. You are in the exact chapter your soul wrote for your return. This is your unfolding. This is your rising. This is your time.